If you didn't know, now is as good a time as any to tell you that clarity creates cash flow. Now, it's one of those crazy, weird, strange sentences when you put these two words together, both clarity and cash flow. And even when you put that middle word in the middle of creates, right? Because people often think to themselves, clarity creates cash flow. How does that work? So that's exactly what we're going to be talking about in this video. So I was thinking about this and it just was so profound in my mind how connected clarity and cash flow is. So, for example, if you've studied any high level marketing content, you would hear the phrase again and again and again: if you confuse, you lose. If you confuse, you lose. If you confuse, you lose. And the reason that's super powerful in connection to what I'm talking about is because the opposite of confusion is actually clarity. So, if you confuse, you lose. That means if you have clarity, you win. And in the game of cash flow, which is the game that we're all in, clarity actually creates cash flow. It's the clarity that God had when the Bible says in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning, God created, which allowed him to create. He could only create out of his clarity. And what happens is today, many of us are attempting to create, but attempting to create out of a lack of clarity. And what are we attempting to create? We're attempting to create so much, but many and much of what we're attempting to create is birthed out of a clear path of cash flow. So, for example, if you want to ensure that your bills are paid, so they're not things that are, I guess, taking up the space in your mind, then you need cash flow, right? Or you should desire cash flow, I assume, right? And one of the biggest lessons over the years that I have found myself teaching my students, my clients, my audiences again and again and again is about the three different types of money you can make in property. Now, I always emphasize the fact that I didn't say, and I don't believe, and I don't say that there's only three ways you can make money in property. But as I've echoed, I'll echo again. Although there are multiple ways, maybe even hundreds or even thousands of ways you can make money in property, there are still only ever three types of money you can make in property. So a great question is, Samuel, what are they? So let's break them down. The first one is known as equity. Equity is what I like to call money stuck in bricks. Equity is the difference between how much you bought a property for and how much you can now sell or refinance, but let's use the term sell because it's clearer, or sell a property for. So if you buy a house for £100,000 and you find 10 years later the house is worth £200,000, you now have the difference, the gap between the first 100 you paid for it and the second 100, because now it's worth 200. That 100,000 gap is your equity. Now, the interesting thing is, if you're on a repayment mortgage and you've paid down 10,000, although you bought it for 100,000, you now only owe 90,000. And because you owe 90,000, that equity is actually more than the 100,000 in which it's grown. It's also the 10,000 in which you've already paid. So that's equity. And unfortunately, the challenge with equity is that's not money you can go to a showroom and buy a new vehicle. It's not money you can use on a website and buy some airline flights. It's not money you can use to pay for your child to go to private school. So it's money stuck in bricks. And the second type of money, well, let me get into this before I even go into the second type of money. One of the things I find interesting is the overwhelming majority of my clients that I've had in the past are all people that have focused on building a property portfolio based on equity. Now, in some of these people's cases, it's because they were told to do that when, our parents said to us, you can't go wrong with property or stuff like that, right? In many of these people's cases, it's not because they've been told to do it, it's just because it was natural. It's natural to buy and hold and buy and hold and buy and hold and treat the properties as if they're gold, right? And as if one day the value is just going to go up astronomically, and as a result, you will become way more wealthy. Now, the second type of money that you can make in property is known as profits. Now, Jim Rohn often is quoted saying profits are better than wages, but Samuel I Can Win always says that profits are better than wages when they come in the right stages. So what are profits? Let's paint that out. Profits are the difference that is made when you liquidate an asset and it can only be made one time. So let's say, for example, you buy a property and you buy that property for £100,000. And let's say this property has a garage on it. So it's a 3-bedroom house with a garage, okay? And let's say we know in that area, 4-bedroom houses, even the most dilapidated 4-bedroom house sells for £150,000, okay? So let's say we decide we're going to take this 3-bedroom house, because we have a garage, we're going to turn the garage into a 4th bedroom, and then we're going to sell the house. And the strategy is called doing a flip, okay? So we invest 20 extra £1,000. We take the garage on this house and we turn this house from a 3-bedroom house to a converted garage bedroom 4-bedroom house. Now, if we sell this house, even at the minimum, we expect to get £150,000. So we put 100,000 in to buy the property. We put 20,000 in to refurbish the property, assuming, for the sake of ease in this illustration, that all the fees and taxes are included in that 120,000. We then sell the property for 150,000 and we end up with a profit, okay? And that profit in this example is 150,000, take away 120,000, it's that gap in the middle, it's the 30,000, okay? Now for some people, they're super excited when they hear that. They're like, Samuel, that's all I want to do. I want to go buy houses, convert them and sell them on to someone else. And the challenge with that is, if you are on a specific salary right now, whatever your salary is, you think of your salary, if you are able to make £30,000 from the sale of one house, what you have to realize is if your salary is greater than £30,000, then you have to do that more than once each year, okay? In order to replace your income, that is. Now, the next part of this, where this gets really, really interesting, is unfortunately, because you've sold that house, you've liquidated that property, you will never, ever, 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 ever make another pound, dollar, buck, cent from that house again, because the house is gone, it's sold, right? So what basically ends up happening is you, if you desire to replace your income with profits, you will now have to basically become a wage slave. You now have to do at least, let's say you're on a 60,000 salary each year, you now have to do this twice every single year. And bear in mind, this £30,000 each time is a pre-tax profit. You still have to pay tax on that, okay? But now you have to do that twice a year minimum to at least replace your income. And you have to do that every year for the rest of your life, as long as you desire to have income, because every time you sell the property, you liquidate the asset, okay? So these are the first 2 types of money you can make in property. Now, the third is the one I like the most. I'm just going to be transparent, right? And this is why I always talk about it. The third is known as cash flow. Now, I define cash flow as the residual recurring revenue that you and I have at our disposal. Cash flow is like it's the money that keeps on coming. Okay, it's not determined by how uniquely intelligent you are. It's not determined by how many activities you do in a day. It's not determined by so many other things that other types of money in property are determined by. And a question I often ask people when I'm talking to them in a different setting is, now that you know the 3 types of money you can make in property, which of these 3 do you think is the best to replace an income? Because when you think about it, you get paid in your employment every single month. Okay, and the interesting thing is cash flow is the only one out of those 3 that pays you every single month. And when you start to get your head around that, guess what happens? You have a level of clarity. And that clarity is what allows you to create cash flow. And the challenge we have currently in society is most people don't have that foundational clarity, but yet they expect to create that consistent and then colossal cash flow. And one of the things I just literally stumbled upon probably in around 2015 when I was working full time, is I had a property sourcing business. I was finding property assets and selling them to other people. And those other people would pay me a fee. And that fee was, if you think of the 3 types of money you can make in property, that fee was a profit because it was a one-time liquidated fee. Typically, I'd get paid once, that person will take the property and they'd get paid every single month, depending on the strategy they were doing. And what happened is, my wife had some issues at work. It's a long story, but because of the type of content we're doing here, I will share with you the story, right? My wife was training to become a qualified teacher. She finished all the university degrees, her first degrees in psychology. She finished her PGCE, that's the academic year of teacher training. And she was doing what we call the NQT year. The NQT is the newly qualified teacher year. That's the year where, as a teacher, you spend a year, most of which in schools. And as you go through these schools, you have a mentor in each of these schools, usually 2 schools, 3 schools max, depending on the program you're on. And the mentor is supposed to basically just chaperone your learning, make sure you're doing the stuff you're doing, have these regular meetings with you. And then at the end of that, they sign you off to say, yep, this person's a qualified teacher. They can go into the world and teach. So effectively, my wife's doing her NQT year and she's working in this school which she really at the start of her process through her interview and that really liked the school. But what was interesting, and again, I'll let her tell the story one day, so you guys can get another side of it. But basically, when she was applying for that job and she was going for the interview, I prayed about that situation. Like big decisions in our life, I often pray about. This was over 10 years ago, but I prayed about it. And I felt the Lord say to me, she's not going to enjoy it there. And I did share that with her, okay? And I know for some of you might be thinking, oh, that's a bit deep. Like, why would you say that? You're going to share negativity. It wasn't really about negativity. I think a lot of the time, God is attempting to prepare us or persuade us to do the right thing. And the right thing for her might not have been going to work there in the first place, but who knows? Anyway, I shared with her what the Lord put on my heart, and that was she isn't going to enjoy it there. Shared that with her. She went to the interview. The interview was absolutely amazing from my memory, from what she shared. So for her, she was convinced. Samuel's got it wrong. He must have misheard. Boom, boom, boom. Let's go. So she starts working in this school, okay? Long story short, a few months in, she's having no meetings with her quote unquote mentor, okay? The mentor who's supposed to be meeting her. Now, mind you, at the same time, around the same time, I've just qualified to become a teacher trainer. So I'm not just a outstanding teacher in the classroom. I've not just been observed by Ofsted through means of an Ofsted inspection I had a little while before that, but I've also just become a teacher trainer, which means I get paid way more because I teach teachers how to teach as well as teach, right? So I'm at home hearing from my wife. Robbie's telling me, oh, XYZ, this is happening in the school. And I'm asking her, like, okay, what did your mentor say? And she's like, oh, I've not met with my mentor. I haven't spoken with my mentor. Me and my mentor haven't had any meetings. And this goes on for months and months and months and months and months. And I've said to her several times, like, oh, you should touch base and ask someone, like, when are you going to have your mentorship meetings, etc. Long story short, Robbie does that. She starts to talk to the people in the school and ask them about the mentoring meetings. And they basically turn around and say, oh, this woman should have been meeting with you. Her mentor was a woman. She was actually quite a highly ranked teacher in the school, which again, even surprises me to this day why what happened. So let's go into this. So Robbie now says, she's now told, okay, this person should have been meeting with you, etc., etc. So Robbie tries to investigate a bit more, find out a bit more. Then I believe Robbie requested for her mentor to be changed. Her mentor was changed to another individual. This gentleman says to Robbie, okay, what was the outcome of your meetings with the woman? And Robbie says, well, I've never met with her. I've never ever met with her. And then this gentleman says to her, oh, but we've got meeting minutes of you and her having met, signed by both of you. Now, Robbie thought that was very interesting because Robbie knew she had never had a meeting with her. So this gentleman proceeds to pull out these meeting minutes with basically a forged signature, my wife's signature forged on the paper. And it was so obvious that the signature was forged. My wife took a picture of it. It was obvious because my wife's handwriting looks nothing like the handwriting. The handwriting looked like the handwriting of a little child. And it's interesting because the signature actually looked in keeping with the woman's handwriting and in keeping with her signature, which was super weird. And it was what it was. So long story short, my wife started having she started having stress, right? Stress, which was work related. And specifically, the doctors diagnosed what Robbie experienced as what they call hemiplegic migraines. For those of you who want to do the dig deep in, right? Do the deep diving, dig deep in. That's digging deep and diving deep of all at the same time. So for those of you who want to dig deeper, like my wife started to have at that time what they defined as hemiplegic migraines, which are what they call a mini stroke, where basically a human being can lose feeling in part of their body due to stress or whatever that may be. So she's going through this, okay? I'm at home, obviously teacher trainer, know what is expected of teachers, especially mentoring teachers. She's going through this stuff, like over days, she's kind of unable to go work. She's going through a lot of stuff emotionally, psychologically. She's just thinking to herself, like, how can someone who's in a position of power do such a crooked thing? Okay. And we have these conversations, we go hospital. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happens in the interim. Long story short, as a man, I'm just going to talk for myself. As a man who's maybe a bit old school. Okay. Let me just throw that out there right there. I start feeling like I'm not pulling my weight as a husband. I start feeling like I'm not being the man who I believed my dad raised me to be. I start feeling like I'm not being the man I'm supposed to be in order to achieve the things God has shown me. Like, that's not family leadership. That's not raising your family. That's not leading your household, right? That's letting someone take a hit when really you should be taking the hit, okay? The Bible also says, it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. And he gave his life for the church. So I should be giving my life for my wife, right? To some degree. So, well, not to some degree, to some degree. I say that, but I had to stop myself there because I know some people would run away with that idea to destinations that I'm not talking about, which is why I said to some degree. But then I had to stop myself and say, well, not to some degree, because to the degree I'm talking about all the way, okay? But we'll leave that for another day. So I now start having a lot of introspective experiences. I start thinking about myself, thinking about where I'm not doing what I should be doing, how I'm not protecting my wife, how I'm not providing for my wife in a way that circumvents her and protects her from this experience. And it was at that point that me and her had a conversation. And one of the things she said to me is, like, I'll just share this. She said to me at this time, Samuel, I don't know anyone who knows more about property than you. That was one of the things she shared with me. And that kind of nugget that she shared helped me start thinking about all the side hustle property deals I was doing outside of my work. And all those side hustle property deals I was doing outside of my full-time job at the time were bringing in some good revenue. But like I shared earlier, it was bringing in profits. It was bringing in lumps of cash every now and then when we'd sell a deal, okay? Because we were property sourcing. That was the activity. And what hit me in that season of my life was I could never really replace my income from that type of revenue, because I'd always have to go back and do the work again. I'd always have to go back and do the work again. I'd always have to go back and do the work again, which is very similar to a job, might I add. So the penny dropped. Like, the lesson was learned. The insight was given. What I discovered at that time, in that season of my life, was I need to shift the type of money that I was making from property. I needed to shift out of making profits and shift into making cash flow. And this is why it's important to understand that it's clarity that creates cash flow. It was my clarity, my discovery of who I desire to be, who I am, the man I'm supposed to be in my household, the leader I believe God has called me to be, that caused me to think to a degree where I could see that my clarity would produce something other than just clarity. And that clarity for me created cash flow to the degree that in 2015, I started seeking and searching for new avenues in order to tap into the industry I was already half, side hustle tapped into. Part of that was me investing money into going on to more courses. Part of that was me expanding and enlarging my network. There were so many things that came out of that, but nonetheless, it was the clarity that was the fostering foundation to create the cash flow. It was the clarity that put me in the positions where I recognized I needed to create cash flow, let alone how to create the cash flow. And I wanted to share this because I thought it would be valuable for you to see that your clarity being increased is going to have a direct impact on your cash flow being increased. But there's another side to that. The other side to that is the catastrophe side. The other side to that is not only that clarity creates cash flow, but the other side is that confusion literally corrupts cash flow. You see, when people are confused about a situation, a scenario, or a setting in their life, it fosters into other areas of their life. And for many people, many a times, it fosters into the area of finances. It fosters into the area of how you create wealth, how you generate wealth, how you retain wealth, how you manage and maintain wealth. And this was one of the things that I discovered back in 2015, which shifted things for me. Now, I am by no means saying since 2015 till today, my cash flow has been on an all-time high, all the way to the sky, and we've never had any problems, like all problems bye-bye, right? Just wanted to rhyme there. But no, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is every single time I've had a season of divine clarity in my life, every single time things have got clearer for me in my life, every single time I've seen further and faster or farther in my life, I've seen how cash flow is created faster in my life. And this is what I believe would be of immense value to you when you can see how clarity has a direct relationship with your cash flow. Now, You might be saying, Samuel, can you get more tactical? Can you show me literally how I can create more cash flow using clarity? Yes, okay. One of the simplest ways I can do that is by articulating to you that there are areas in your life right now that lack clarity. For example, how you are generating revenue. And if you clear up that area, for example, like many of my high-level clients who come to me with portfolios of 8 to 10 properties already, with portfolios worth 4 or 5 million pounds already. But unfortunately, those portfolios with those 8 to 10 properties are only generating them 200 to 300 at best. In most cases, they're not even hitting the 300, 200 to 300 pound at best per property. Now, you do the maths for yourself. Let's do it on the extreme. 10 properties in a portfolio. Let's say each of those properties are worth, on average, £500,000 because, you know, they've gone up in value. You know, there's equity in the assets. Okay. Now, we've got a portfolio of £5 million, 10 properties, all on average worth £500,000. But each of these properties are only generating £300 maximum each month. Okay, so let's do the maths. 300 times 10 is £3,000 per month. Now, you cross that across a year, that's £36,000 being generated per year. Now, here's a good question. If you are on a salary of £80,000, if you are on a salary of £100,000, if you are on a salary of £110,000, if you are even on a salary of £60,000, would you feel comfortable leaving your salary in order to live on £36,000 being generated from your property portfolio? The answer for most people is no, I don't think so. Especially not with the Section 24 introduction, especially not with all like the removal of like just all of the changes that have been implemented, you might say from the government, but just from the landscape of real estate and property investment, most people are not going to give up a £60,000 salary for a £36,000 property income. So the question then becomes, how do I get clear? Like, really, the question is, what do I do? Okay. And the answer is super simple. And this is what I coach my clients on. But the reality is, the reason people get in that predicament in the first place is because of a lack of clarity. Because they lack clarity as to why they're buying the properties in the first place. They lack clarity as to the value of these assets. The value of these assets is not, I own a portfolio worth £500,000. The value of these assets is not, each house I own is worth £500,000. The value of these assets is not, my portfolio is now in total worth £5 million. That's not the value of the asset. If the value of the asset, if the purpose of the asset is to replace your income, the value in the asset is that £300 a month that it generates for you. And if that £300 a month that it generates for you is not substantial enough to do what you desire it to do, i.e. replace your income, then that's where we have clarity on what we need to change. That's where we now have clarity on what we need to shift. So here's a quick question. Samuel, how do I tactically change my situation and go from having 10 properties generating me £300 per month each property to a predicament where I literally do have an income through means of cash flow that allows me and encourages me to be able to leave my full-time salary of 100,000 a year or 120,000 a year, and so forth and so forth? And the answer is, you reconfigure, reconstruct, and restructure your portfolio so it's cash flow focused and no longer equity focused, or definitely no longer profit focused. What might that look like? That might look like you shifting the strategy that you've applied on each of these houses. So you may have been doing bog standard buy to let. Okay, you bought the house and you've rented it out. You may, on some of these properties, have to move to a model of short-term accommodation, okay? Holiday lets. These are some of the language people use, right? The actual strategy is called serviced accommodation, okay? Some people call it Airbnb. They're the people you can clearly see, you know, they're not familiar with strategy, okay? Because Airbnb is a website, it's a platform that can be used to leverage in order to find guests, okay? But the actual strategy is called serviced accommodation. It's exactly what hotels do. So you shift to another model, okay? Now there's typically only 3 models you can use. I'm going to outline all of them to you right now. The first one is starting to tap into multiple rooms. That's one of the key ways to increase your cash flow, multiple rooms, okay? So instead of a 3-bedroom house being rented to one family, you have a 3-bedroom house being rented to 3 different individuals, multiple rooms. Now, again, for the sake of this video not being too long, yes, there are multiple regulations, multiple stipulations, and multiple aspects of this, which I don't have time to go into. But again, this is where there's value in developing and deepening your clarity, okay, which comes from coaching or learning or development or being in the right rooms, okay? So the first thing is multiple rooms. That's one of the ways to rapidly increase your cash flow. The second one is multiple stays. That's the one I alluded to a moment ago in terms of serviced accommodation, okay? The reason why hotels are able to charge £45, £50, £280, £400, £1,000, depending on where you are, per night, is because they are shortening the gestation period in which you can stay. And by virtue of dividing the supply, they radically actually increase the demand, okay? And with an increased demand and a reduced supply, as you guys may have known from videos I've done in the past, the price goes up, okay? So that's exactly what's happening here. So there's multiple rooms you can tap into, or multiple stays you can tap into, or there's my favorite, which is niche groups, okay? Niche groups is where you're tapping into either a specialist group, which you can be paid extremely much more for on a nightly basis, or a specialist group may be a specific niche, okay? So there's specific niches which again pay way more than standard niches, okay? And just to give you one as an example, air hostesses, okay? Airline attendants, okay? People that fly on planes for extraneous amounts of hours, their airlines, the actual company, the airline often pays for them to be situated and stay in certain places, okay? So that's a key pocket of a specialized group which will pay you a premium in order to have access to your asset, i.e. your property, okay? So when you take a portfolio of 10 properties, generating you £300 per month, every single month, that's £3,000 per month from the whole portfolio, which is worth a whole £5 million. And I want you to think about this for a minute, right? And it just comes to me right now, so I want to share this. Think about £5 million sitting in a room and only producing 36,000 a year. Like, something's wrong with that maths. This is the reason why, if you know what you're doing when it comes to cash flow creation, clarity is key. Because if you are clear on that picture, I have £5 million in assets, okay? And yes, most of that might be leveraged. You might have 4 million of that, which is lent from the bank. That's okay. But just think of the maths. If you have £5 million working for you and it only produces £36,000 for you a year, something's wrong with that picture. So how do we fix that? Well, as we've said, multiple rooms, multiple stays, and also specialist groups. Now, if you tap into those things, imagine what you could have. You could have 10 properties worth £500,000, where each property, for example, is now generating you £1,000 a month. Now, if each property is generating you £1,000 a month, £1,000 a month times 10 properties, that's £10,000 a month, okay? Might not be your goal. Your goal might be 15. You might need 5 more. Okay, but we're closer to your goal than you were on 3,000 a month. We've more than tripled your monthly income, your monthly cash flow through means of applying the glasses of clarity. Okay, so £1,000 a month on 10 properties, that's now £10,000 per month. Across a year, that's £120,000 being generated every single year. Here's my question to you: would you give up a salary where you have to go to work for 40 hours every week for 40 weeks of every year to hope and pray that you could end up living on 40% of your income after you retire? Would you give £120,000 being given to you from the 40-40-40 plan up in order to take on the exact same £120,000 coming through your current existing portfolio of 10 properties? Now, I don't know your answer, but I definitely know my answer. My answer to that would be in good old Jim Rohn fashion, of course. Why? Because I also have a limitless upside on my portfolio. You see, on my portfolio, I can funnel 50% of that £120,000 I make this year, let's call that £60,000, into another asset. And instead of having 10, I can go to 11, I can go to 12, I can go to 13. I can grow that income generating machine with my clarity, creating my cash flow. But the only reason I'm able to do that is because I'm able to understand that clarity creates cash flow and that confusion corrupts cash flow. So with that being said, I wanted to just share this value with you to assist you to move further faster in your journey. And my prayer is that you use the insights I've shared in here, like predominantly first and foremost, to get clear, but then secondarily to actually apply these tactics to your own portfolio, so your portfolio and predominantly your cash flow can start to grow. This is Something I Can Win, signing out. Remember, small keys open big doors. If you got value from this video, I would love for you to like the video. Feel free to comment and leave down in the comments what your key takeaway or your big breakthrough was from watching this content. And then side by side with that, if you're not subscribed, you know what to do. Get subscribed, and why not even share this video with someone you know who could find value from it too. Now, there's also going to be another video on the screen right now that YouTube is going to recommend for you. I would encourage you to take YouTube's recommendation, go watch that video, because it will also help you move further faster in your future. Good day, God bless. Let's go.